So if you've got questions as Rachel's going through the slides, then please put them in there and I will attempt to collate them. And okay, last couple of people in. Right, so welcome everybody. I won't speak for long at all because the main attraction here is Dr. Rachel Coxcoon, who is writing an absolutely brilliant guide to for local authorities and community energy groups to help get more community-owned solar on council assets. And so without further ado, I will hand over to Rachel.
Great, thanks, Kirsty. And can I just check, you can see my slides and you can't also see the Teams window? You can just see
we can
the
just
slides.
see okay, the slides. Yeah,
I know I'm better with Zoom and I'm always slightly confused with Teams whether I'm doing it right. Okay, morning everyone. So I can't see very many of you. I can see Kirsty, and as Kirsty said, there will be a bit later in the meeting where we'll have a general Q&A. There's also going to be a little bit later where I'm going to be asking you for some feedback and your thoughts to inform the last bit of the guide that is still to be written. So there will be a little bit of interaction, and also early on I'm going to try and get you to do a bit of a poll online just so they can work out who's in the room and what it is that you know what stages that you're at. So if that goes wrong, it goes wrong, and it's not the end of the world, but it will be helpful for us to know if we can make that work. So anyway, yes, as Kirsty said, we are in the process of developing a new resource, a new sort of toolkit it's principally aimed at local authorities, although this meeting today is aimed at community energy groups. So don't be sitting there thinking, oh no, I'm at the wrong meeting if you're from a community energy group. It's so that you know that this is coming and that your local authority should be able to access it and how you can help to sort of put it in front of them and make it helpful to them. So let's see if I can get my slides to move on. So just to explain sort of who's what and why we're here. So this piece of work is funded by the Greater South East Net Zero Hub, but the contents of the resource are going to be relevant to any local authority in England and probably Wales as well. The reason that it might not work in Scotland is that the procurement regime there is different. And so if you're here from a Scottish community group, some of it will be relevant to you, but you will need to take a bit of caution about looking at the procurement stuff. But in the thing, it will be clear that it is really for England, but it's not specifically for the South East. It's just being funded by the South East Net Zero Hub. But obviously various laws cover the whole country. So we are doing this with a specific focus on supporting the rollout of community-owned solar PV on council land and buildings. So it's a resource that's very laser focused on that, and I will explain why when I get into it a bit more. So it's not looking at things like community-based retrofit and advice services, and hopefully it will make sense why. And this is almost the last in a series of workshops and webinars and conferences that Kirsty's arranged over the last 3 or 4 months, where we've been getting feedback from community energy groups and local authorities. I can't believe there are still people coming in. It's amazing. Anyway, so the project partners are, the project is led by Community Energy Pathways, and Kirsty's the project manager. And early on, if there's anyone here from a local authority, which I believe there are, their role was they did a whole host of interviews with local authorities, finding out their sort of current level of capability to support the development of community energy locally. And then that has informed kind of what we think needs doing. And then my role, I'm from an organisation called Climate Guide, is to produce the toolkit and the resources themselves. So I'm the toolkit author, and there's a sort of an iterative process, I suppose, feeding back out of what we're learning from the webinars and conferences and so on as we've gone along. And then there are 2 other partners, UK 100, who, if you look for a local authority, you may have worked with them, who have been doing some more of the local authority liaison and will be promoting the resources through councils, and Community Energy England, obviously a really useful partner for this. They'll be producing some video content and things like that to help push it out there once it's ready. So I'm going to do a little bit of who on earth am I, so that you can understand who's writing this and why. I think there's probably some people on the call who already know me from whenever, because I'm extremely old and have been around for a long time. But anyway, if you don't, this is kind of to give you a background of why we're doing what we're doing, and why it is that I've used a lot of my own background knowledge to sort of shape what it is that we're doing. So for those of you who've been kicking around in community energy world for a really long time, you might remember way back in the sort of 2009 to 12 period, a program called Plan Local, which produced a big folder with DVDs in it. That's how old school it was. It wasn't even online videos. They were all about how to get community energy projects going, through which I'd interviewed and made videos with some of what were then the fledgling groups like the Low Carbon Hub in Oxford, who had, you know, at that time, I think 2 solar arrays on schools, and look where they are now, look how they've grown. And so that was all about how to consult your community, how to get them involved and so on. Then I was the head of the local and community empowerment team at the Centre for Sustainable Energy for quite a long time, for about 7 or 8 years. I was the lead administrator for the government's Urban Community Energy Fund and the Next Generation programme funded by Power to Change. A lot of work around setting up sort of supportive planning frameworks with local authorities, of personal experience in community energy through chairing a community energy group in a village where I used to live, and exactly the same struggles that a lot of you have faced about trying to find a site to put some generating assets on, in which we were not successful. And then also from the other side of the fence, I have actually been at that decision-making end of it. I was cabinet member for climate change and planning at Cotswold District Council for 4 years. And then I moved away, partly because I was doing a PhD, which is looking at, which I've just finished, looking at politically right-leaning attitudes to climate policy. So that has inflected how this is written in terms of trying to make the guidance as politically neutral and as palatable across the board as possible. And then also on the side of doing my PhD, I run Climate Guide, which is effectively a consultancy supporting local authorities, training politicians and that sort of thing. So obviously, if you're a therapist, you're probably looking at that thinking, wow, this person really needs to get a grip and settle down and do one thing for more than 5 minutes. But anyway, that combined background experience, I hope, gives you some confidence that I've sort of looked at this for a long time from a lot of angles. And hopefully what we've come up with is going to be really helpful for you as community groups, but also for you as local authorities if you're on the call moving forward. So now we're going to try something which may well not work, but let's give it a go. If you have a smartphone and you can scan that QR code with your camera and you're comfortable doing that, then go ahead and do so. And it will take you directly to a survey where we're going to look at some questions. And I'll stop sharing this presentation and go to that website because I couldn't make it in bed. If you're not au fait with QR codes, go to a different tab on your computer and go to menti.com, put that in your search bar, and then it will ask you for a code, and then you put in 81744232. So let's give a minute for everybody to do that, and I will leave this screen up while you do it, and then I will stop sharing this screen and go to there. So just want to get a sense of who's in the room. People are still coming into the room. So if you're just arrived in the room, we've just introduced what we're doing, but now just introduced us, but now I want to know who you are, and there are an awful lot of you. How many are on now, Kirsty? I can't see the participant count.
80.
80, right, okay, so we've got 80 people here, brilliant. All right, so if you've just come in, either scan that QR code and go directly to the survey from that, or go to a different tab on your computer and go to menti.com and put in the code that you can see there. Kirsty, could you type that code into the chat just so that I can stop sharing here and go directly to the survey, just so that
it's turned off for this meeting. Sorry, chat is turned off.
Oh, is it? Oh, don't worry about it then.
Let me just see if I can turn it back.
81744232. I'll put it in the Q&A.
I will put it in the Q&A.
Right. Okay, so then I'm going to share a different window now, which should be the survey itself. Can you see that now? Oh, look, loads of people made it. Amazing. So I've got a fair few results already. Can you see that little bar graph popping up? Great. Brilliant. Okay, so I just wanted to get a sense.
Sorry, excuse me. I've got a message saying waiting for the presenter to change slides. I can't see any questions.
I need to move on to the next question. So that's have you been able to answer the first question?
I can't see it. It's just saying waiting for the presenter to change slides.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's see if I can go back. Not to worry, when I get to the next one. Are you a community energy group or?
Well, I wear 2 hats, local authority and a community energy scheme.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay. You could have, I think I left it so people could put 2 because some people are both. Okay. Getting a good sense then that there is more than just community energy groups in the room, right? So some of the questions that follow are just for if you're a community energy group, and some of them are for local authorities. So I'll make that clear. This is just so that I can get a sense of who we've been talking to. So the next question, if you represent a community energy group, what stage are you at? Are you a sort of fledgling group that's not doing anything? Are you doing more on the advice side, but you're not generating? Or do you have a generation project already? Would be useful to know. And I will show the responses once people have moving out of the way slightly, I can see. And if you don't represent a community energy group, then don't worry about answering this one. I will just move it on in a minute. All right, let me click on that one because that's slowed down. So, okay, pretty good mix. So about a third and a third of those of you who are here from community energy groups. Some of you haven't really started yet. Some of you just on the sort of more advice side of things, and some looking for generation projects. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question. If you represent a community energy group, again, have you engaged your local authority? Have you already tried to talk to your local authority to find a site to put something like solar PV or wind turbine, whatever?
Can I just butt in here? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wear several hats. I'm a borough councillor. I'm a parish councillor.
Yeah.
I'm on a local hall committee, which is involved in getting solar. But I'm also part of a fledgling CIC group. So I have no idea how to answer that question.
Well, as the community energy group, have you engaged with the district or county council to look for sites, basically?
Not
so
really,
with that hat on.
Because with my knowledge locally, I'm approaching the organisations directly. So I'm involved in one village hall and I'm approaching other village halls and a tennis club and things like that. So I actually don't know how to answer that, but I'm sort of active.
Well, if you haven't done it yet, then just haven't tried it yet. But yeah, some people are just sort of doing, I'm more trying to get a sense of what's the balance, for example, of people who are saying, well, that was exactly what I was thinking would happen, is people would say, well, we've tried, but we're not getting anywhere very quickly, which does seem to be the majority of what's happening here.
I think there's suspicion because not enough people know enough about the CICs.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to address with this resource. And don't forget, this resource is for local authorities, so it's not going to help you convince a corporate partner or a sort of, a local sports club or a factory that you want to put solar on the roof. Or it's very much geared at local authorities.
Yeah, that's
all right. Let's move
with my
to the next question.
The local borough are looking at starting one, so I do wear that hat as well.
Okay, cool. All right. So if again you are a community energy group, have you already submitted an expression of interest to Great British Energy? Do they know you exist? Or if you represent one. So if you are a local authority and community energy group, I'm thinking here about submitting an EOI on behalf of the community energy group, not your council. All right, so I think we're pretty much there at the count. So lots of you have, that's good to know. So I wasn't really sure how well understood that system was. If you haven't, please do. The more information they have, the better. And then if you are a local authority, have you submitted an expression of interest to Great British Energy for the partnership fund? I think there were about 14 of you on the call. I remember from slide 1, I've already lost track. All right, that's what we've got here. Okay, well, if you didn't know you could, you can. So do go on GBE's website later, Great British Energy, and just it's not a particularly complicated process. It's a fairly high level question. It doesn't commit you to anything. It's just a whole set of, we're interested in supporting community energy. They just want to get a sense really at this point of who's trying to do what and who's at what stage. It's really to inform how they move forward. Helen's hands up. Is there a question specifically about Great British Energy?
No, it's just about the question. If we're not a local authority, how do we answer that question and move forward?
Don't answer it. Oh, I think you can move. I think, oh, that's the last one actually. So don't worry about it because that's the last one.
Cheers.
Okay, great. All right. So that's really useful for us. Thank you. To help just continue shaping, it helps me think about what else is happening here as we go through this meeting. So I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to go back to the main presentation. And I'm going to start sharing again. All right, you should be able to see that Menti slide again now, I think. Which you don't need to go back to because we're moving on. All right, okay. So as I said earlier, this resource is very specifically focused on helping councils to get to the point where they have a strategic approach to supporting the development of community-owned solar on their own land and buildings. So it's solar, community solar on council assets. And obviously, we all know that community energy is much wider than that. And some of you might be thinking, well, we do energy advice or we want to do a wind turbine or whatever it might be. But there is a good reason for starting with this, because we all know that in some ways solar PV is the most straightforward often technically and financially to do all the modelling for. And we sort of talk about it as a gateway drug for this community local authority partnership. And if we look to some of the most successful community energy groups out there in the country, an awful lot of them started with relatively straightforward solar PV on a building, quite often on schools, but ultimately quite often that did involve them dealing with the council. In some cases it was directly through an academy trust or a faith group. So this idea that once local authorities understand, as was just said there around, people are suspicious of what is the CIC. Once local authorities get over that hump of engaging with that first project, sort of almost regardless of political stripe and flavour of the council, they then start to feel like we understand this now. And then it's from that you get the big hitters like low carbon Oxford, the low carbon hub in Oxford or Bath and West Community Energy. They go on to grow their portfolios and grow the services that they offer and build that more kind of delivery partner relationship with the local authority that allows them to do things like provide energy advice with sort of a local authority branding or support or endorsement. I also think this is really important from this, something that I think the sector suffers from a little bit is, perfect being the enemy of good. This idea that we really want to do all these things and we're really excited to offer energy advice and do retrofit and build a wind turbine and what about this and what about that, and then there's so much chat about what could happen that nothing actually happens. So what we want to do is have that anchor, that base, that project that works, that is relatively simple, that is proven now over literally a whole generation, sort of 18 to 20 years of experience of people doing this, that most successful groups from that similar base is kind of where they've come. But also because, as we'll see later, one of the biggest issues that we have to people replicating what the most successful energy groups have done is that the procurement base is no longer the same. So how councils may have justified allowing a particular group to put solar on a council office or whatever in the past doesn't necessarily stack up. And the more risk averse your council is, the less likely they are to want to replicate a thing that was done almost 15 years ago under completely different regulatory frameworks. So that is why we are going with this extremely specific focus just on PV on council assets. So this is what the toolkit is structured like. So it's there's an overarching document that I've been calling the navigation guide, but you will just see it as the resource when it gets published, which sort of explains to you what it's all for and why have we written this. And bear in mind that this is for local authorities, not community energy groups. So if you're on this call from a community energy group and you pick that up and you think, why on earth are you telling me what community energy is and why it's good? It's because it's not for you. It's for you to give to your councils who may not have a clue and may not understand, or maybe, as has been noted, a bit suspicious of the whole thing. And then the first half of it is what I'm calling the decision-making templates. And these will be editable documents. So they're just in Word, you know, as plain as can be, because the idea is that they will be edited internally by local authority officers, which, as we all know, have very little capacity, very little time to work on anything. So the more material they can have that's in a sort of format, in a register that they understand, that they can then adapt and edit relatively lightly, hopefully, the more likely things are to move forward. So that is a sort of case for action, a simple briefing note that they can use internally, particularly if they're more junior officers or a backbench councillor or something that want to quietly build the case for this internally. They don't just want to go piling in. They want to sort of have a meeting and raise the main points. Then there's a very detailed, like the anchor document is the decision paper template, which those of you who work for councils will know what I'm talking about. Those of you who don't might not. This is the sort of format of document that gets presented at a cabinet meeting, for example, where an actual decision is going to be made to do a thing that will then become an embedded part of the corporate plan of the council. So, you know, we'll have milestones and we'll have targets to reach, so on. You might be a councillor, and I did see there were some councillors on the call. There are reasons, there are sometimes approaches where the best way to get this pushed forward in your council might be to bring a motion. And so I've drafted a template motion as well. And again, in the navigation guide, it gives all clear guidance on when that's a risky move and when not to use it. And then the ultimate aim is for you as a local authority, or for your local authority, to adopt a strategy, a strategic level approach to supporting community solar on council assets. So the strategy itself is the final document. The decision paper and everything drives what happens in those democratic decision-making meetings. The strategy is the thing that gets adopted. And then, of course, during that process, when your local authority friendly champion officer is trying to make this happen, they're going to come banging up straight against those departments who are even busier and even more stressed than they are, who will say, oh, I don't understand this. This sounds legally odd, or procurement wise, it sounds weird and we don't think it's possible. So there's a whole series of barrier busting resources, of which probably the sort of most technical one will be the one on procurement. So one of them is a community energy and local authority partnership assessment framework. This is just when that internal officer is going, well, why should we work with this strange group of volunteers? The champion officer will be able to say, actually, they're not a strange group of volunteers. They're a fully incorporated organisation, you know, that ticks all these boxes, that this is why we can trust them. This is why we can work with them. So it's a sort of, but also it works the other way. This partnership has to be, is the council ready to work with you and not waste all your time if you're a community group? Then there's going to be this guidance on procurement, which I'll come to later. Case studies of existing groups. Now, this is not, you know, the stuff, we've all seen it before. We all know who the famous ones are: Bath and West, Low Carbon Hub, Plymouth Energy Community, Bristol Energy Co-op, all of these people. It's more about what they did to get where they are and why what you'd need to do now is different. So, because what we always get at these high level, look at the brilliant things we've achieved. And that is the destination that we all want to get to. We all want to be Bath and West, and we all want to be the low carbon hub. But the path to get there isn't the same anymore necessarily. And that's where these internal conversations fall down. Then there is a document in there which is to give to community energy groups. You might be that you're driving this as a councillor or as a local officer, and you're sort of being harassed in a way by a local, very keen community energy group who's sort of going on at you and doesn't seem to quite grasp exactly how things work in a council and how slow it can be. So this is just for you to hand over to them and say, okay, look, if you wrap your head around that, it might make the whole thing go more smoothly. Then there's quite a lot of example leases and power purchase agreements and stuff out there, and other, you know, things like the Regen London Council toolkit that came out a few months ago is very good. So we're just going to link to those. And then this last one, the frequently raised barriers list. So this is basically someone's going to raise a thing and go, well, we can't possibly, you know, procure directly with a community energy group because that would be favoritism and we're not allowed to do that. And so this is that kind of list of things that always get said with the answer of how to get around them. And I'm going to ask you to help me populate that later in this meeting. We've already done that at a fair number of the other meetings. We're just trying to build that. If you, however many of you said we've tried to engage with our council, but it's slow, you have probably had barriers raised, and I want to know what they are. So the three barriers that this is meant to address, and this is a bit wordy because I have lifted it directly out of one of the documents we've written, the three key barriers as to why community energy seems to sort of get stuck inside councils is the principal one being that there's very often not an embedded corporate or senior level commitment to supporting the development of community energy at a strategic level. So the conversations often happen with specific, sometimes relatively junior officers in teams that don't control what you need to get to. You want to put a thing on a building. That means that the assets team, the estates team, you want to sell electricity to the council. That means the energy purchasing manager and all the procurement team are involved. So if you're only talking to the climate team and they're struggling to get those other colleagues on board or get them to give them the time of day, you're all going around in circles with it. And actually it needs someone even more senior to sort of sit on people and go, no, this is a strategic priority. The legal team will have to deal with it. And that can only be done through the council's fundamental democratic decision-making processes like cabinet meetings and so on. So that's what the sort of decision-making documents are for. And then, you know, as part of that, there is this confusing overlap of responsibilities. If there is no senior level commitment, if there is no strategy, if there are no milestones and targets that the council is trying to achieve, as I know from every other meeting we've held, the main barrier is that things get passed from legal to procurement to climate to back to the education team, because now we want to talk to schools, and nothing ever really happens. So this idea that, you know, someone is holding the ring, so everyone else is operating to certain strategic milestones and key performance indicators to move the whole thing forward. And then the final one is this uncertainty about procurement, which is probably the main reason why various highly successful community groups give presentations regularly, and they say what they did and they say how they achieved it, and then other councils go away scratching their heads going, I'm not quite sure how we could do that. And it's really because the time has moved on, and the regulatory frameworks under which those original decisions in places like Bath and Plymouth and so on, how they were made is not necessarily an available route anymore. So just want to give you, so that you can see the type of thing that's in that decision-making thing. So as I said, the decision paper, the strategy, the motion and so on, is the most detailed document. It's the anchor document that everything else flows from. If you work for a local authority, you'll probably recognise people are increasingly asked to use the Treasury's 5-case business model to bring forward proposals. So this paper is structured around that. It's something called a strategic outline case. It covers the 5 models: the strategic, economic, commercial, financial and management case. And it's like this. It's a Word document that's structured in a very bland way, with red text wherever you need to fill in what is relevant in your local authority. But quite a lot of the work has been done. That's a note to myself, you know, that when DBE's grant scheme stuff is published in a month or so, we can just update that. But you can see here, you know, it outlines the statutory powers of the council to allow a lease, for example, on a community building, so that your legal officers don't have to go and dig that out themselves, because they'll say they haven't got time to do that. That information is all in here, for example. In the economic case, for example, there's an options appraisal talking about, well, we could just do nothing, you know, your business as usual. Why don't we self-install? That's another barrier that's often raised. Well, we're not going to let this community group do it because we should do it. And the question is, well, then why haven't we? That answer is often, actually, well, now we've looked at it, we don't really have the capital. Well, we do have the capital, but we'd rather spend it on something else. So there are always trade-offs. Then you could just commercially lease your roofs as a council. Why wouldn't you do that? You know, this seems like a more kind of obvious route. And then the final option being a community lease and PPA. And so the options appraisal sort of goes through all of that and finishes with, you know, in the management case, it's got things like how you would deliver the programme, what are the timetables with red sections for people to fill in, who will be the programme owner, which officer is now empowered to tell the procurement team and legal team to work with them on this. So that's the detail. And you're sort of thinking, but I've spoken to Bath and West and they've got this lovely cooperation agreement that's 2 sides long and it sounded really easy. Well, it wasn't, because I know lots of people that were involved in that really early. You know, they spent months and months and months talking to the council to get to the point of that agreement, but also that those routes are not necessarily open anymore. There is always a sort of, to some degree, a meeting of minds and a meeting of characters, an overlap of aligned politics and all sorts of things. That means that some of the early groups started at a time when exactly the right person was cabinet member at that council, or the particular grant scheme was in existence that made it a no-brainer. And you aren't able to have the same conversation now that they could have then. And some councils are just inherently more risk averse in their culture. There is limited officer capacity. If we think about the cuts to local authority budgets since the 2010 period to now, There are far fewer officers, there are far smaller sustainability teams and all that sort of thing. And now we have local government reorganisation happening on top. Everybody's very stressed, very stretched. We've got this business of everyone going around in circles. And then also this big thing, which I call the category error objection, where groups go in with this sort of, what we want to do is put a solar array on that school there. The conversation happens at a project level, and an awful lot of energy is expended to only then discover that that school there isn't suitable for some reason, whatever. It can't get a grid connection, or the roof is unsound or needs replacing. And everyone goes, oh, well, we tried. But that's because we're using a sort of project level failure to, in a way, dismiss a whole strategic approach. So what we need to do is get in there that what the council is actually committing to is to strategically support the development of community solar on its assets where that's possible, and therefore to find the right buildings and the right sites. And so where we try and copy the famous groups, you know, they are in a way all exceptions that don't make a rule. Bath and West's cooperation agreement is rightly famous, and it's extraordinary what has been achieved in Bath, and that it's been renewed multiple times. And it is almost at this point a self-fulfilling prophecy, because that council can so very clearly demonstrate that nobody else would come close to delivering what Bath and West Community Energy could do, that almost a direct award now is possible for them, but it wouldn't necessarily work somewhere else where you were starting with a more fledgling group. Plymouth Energy Community is an amazing thing, and a really good example of what a council can do in a community that's probably got less social capital than somewhere like Bath might. What the council there did was effectively establish the community energy group themselves, and then spin it out of the council, and then second this after through a service level agreement, and then it's grown from there and employed and trained local people and done all those amazing things. Would that work under current subsidy control rules? Who knows? North Lincolnshire, a much more recent one, and one that I thought, great, there's a new model, we can use that. This is a brilliant example. They demonstrated a market failure in schools solar, particularly commercial providers picking off the big schools and leaving all the little ones, and they used a Towns Fund grant. It's a brilliant scheme, but it's not easily replicable by someone else that hasn't got 1.5 million lying around to give to a community energy group. So all of these things that we see out there, what we're trying to do is not go around in circles going, can't we do what North Lincolnshire did? But we're going around, we want to say we want to have what North Lincolnshire have, and find another way to get to it. So that second half, that isn't the, you know, paint by numbers decision paper, edit it yourself, will be guidance on things like, you know, how do we address some of the common legal questions that arise? You know, we can't just give this group a peppercorn lease on one of our roofs, that's undervalued. You know, we can show that these questions have been answered lots of times. These are the legal provisions you need to look at. What happens if the group goes bust? Well, this is how we will sort out step-in rights and transfer rights. All of these things are well tested. Procurement is trickier though, because the sort of thing where you are operating, you're exploiting the council's asset to generate income, but you as the community group carry the operating risk. That now means that what you're doing is a concession contract, and that didn't exist in the past. That wasn't a thing that some of our older groups had to deal with. So the idea is to write this guidance so that everyone knows what you're doing, and then you can just procure along. It's all done above board. No one's trying to get around it with some funky thing about community benefit in the background. We are using the procurement regs as they are now designed to be used. In some cases, if it's relatively small, we can still directly award. We might have to tender it openly, but there are ways that we can make sure that we've done market engagement that makes it very clear that we're looking for a community energy approach, or still looking at this one, whether we can pre-qualify people through having an asset lock or something like that. So these are all, some of you probably thinking, what is she talking about? Don't worry about it. This is because it's your local authority that needs to know this, not you, but it's useful for you to read it so that you can know when they're waffling on about concession contracts, what they're actually talking about. So we're now going to play a game, and we're going to use, is there a chat function now, Kirsty, or will we have to put this in Q&A?
I think put it in the Q&A.
Okay, right, stick these in the Q&A and we will filter it all out lately. Right, so we're going to imagine that we are local authority officers. Some of you are, so this will be easy for you, but some of you have dealt with the local authority, and I want you to put that hat on, and there's a very keen councillor, let's say, who's come along and said, I really do think we should be supporting community energy, and we should be putting solar on, you know, as many schools and the leisure centres and whatever. And you're going to go, oh my God, I'm so busy. I just don't think that can be done. And the immediate things that are going to come into your head as that hard stretched, very busy, very tired local authority officer is you're going to go, it probably can't be done because, and I want you to split yourself into groups here so that I don't get all the same answers. So if your first name begins with A to H, I want you to imagine that you are in the council's legal team. If your name begins with I to N, then I want you to think about you're the council's finance team. And if you're in the last half of the alphabet, O to Z, you are in charge of the buildings and estates where these arrays, where these community groups want to put these arrays. So, you know, if you can't think of anything, just put anything down from any particular officer. But if you can try and think about it, okay, I'm the council's lawyer. I have to protect the council from legal challenge. Why am I going to say this can't be done? And then if you go to, where's the Q&A? I can't see it. Is it along the top somewhere? If people are doing, go to the Q&A and just spend, you know, let's spend 5 minutes. You may even have actual ones that have literally been said to you when you've been dealing with a local authority. If so, put them in. You don't have to name the local authority. Anyway, let's do that. Let's kind of brainstorm. Let's collect a load of barriers that jump into your mind. Jess, I can see a question.
Oh, I just can't see the Q&A.
Oh, I can't see it either. So, Kirsty, do you know how to get to
it? Cara, you've been writing stuff in. Where are you seeing it? It should be in the top bar alongside all the other, like people and raise your hand and that kind of thing.
Yes, I suppose the question is, are they running on a browser or are they running through a Teams application?
Oh, yeah, browser in my case.
Rachel, you're on Teams though, aren't you?
I am on, yeah, I can't see it simply because I'm sharing. If I stop sharing,
Yeah.
I'll see what I can see. Yeah, at the very top for me, it says chat, Q&A, people, raise your hand, and then smiley face. Do you have any of that, Jess?
If you're on it,
Everything except Q&A.
Is there a chat? Put it in the chat then. That's fine. We'll still be able to download it. If you can access the chat, put it in the chat.
No, chat's
Chat
there, but
is turned off.
It's turned off.
Okay, let me see. I'm just really.
I'll tell you what,
I don't want to dominate, so it's all good.
I've got an idea. Wait a minute. Don't panic.
So I put something in Q&A. I can see it. So.
Put it wherever you can, because wait a minute. If you are like Jess, unable to see, you can email me by putting. Am I still sharing? I'm not. Am I?
No.
I'm just going to share the last slide. I don't want to share that. Share.
Kirsty, are you able to activate the chat function?
I'm reluctant to do it because what normally happens to me when I fiddle with stuff is that the whole thing breaks.
Yes, Kirsty accidentally closed one of our meetings the other day while people were in it, and it was so terrifying that she's got PTSD and doesn't ever want to do it.
That's right.
Also, I can't do it unless Asma is here because she's my lucky talent.
All right, look, you should now be able to see the final slide that has my email address on it. If you're one of the people who's on a weird browser and you cannot access Q&A, send me an email and just type whatever your barrier thoughts are into an email and send it to me. And we will just collate it all together again at the end. So put it wherever you can and just take a few minutes to do that. Percy, can you see stuff coming up in the Q&A now? Is it clear that people can get into it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I will just leave this slide up for people to be able to see my email address.
Yeah, there's loads of good stuff coming in. Sorry,
Great.
Jess.
Jess is going to come by email. It's direct mail to me. It's fine.
Fantastic answers.
Brilliant. I'll be about another 2 or 3 minutes to pour your hearts and souls into all the no's you've been given. And then we'll quickly move on to just a wider Right, I will stop sharing that so that I can also just quickly look at the Q&A as well. Added into long-term pricing. Okay, so these are coming up. Interesting. Some of them saying they're hoping that GB Energy might just pay for stuff. That's an interesting one. Yeah. Right, are these still coming in? I think they are. So it's interesting, some of these, particularly around what happens if schools academize, have come up at every meeting. So I'm definitely going to try and look into that one. There's one that I don't fully understand that I would like a little bit of guidance on. Let me go back to that one. Here we go. It is from Catherine. Catherine Rooney. You've put uncertainty about treasury and solar on school roofs has created a wait and see mentality in some councils. Can you, is Treasury said something that you should be doing?
Well, no, this relates to Cara made the point as well. There's a current kind of uncertainty around Treasury and Department for Education around permission for solar on schools.
Oh yes, okay, that yes.
So it was
right.
that same issue.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, sorry, I thought you meant internal treasury at the council. No, yeah, okay, that makes more sense.
No, but
right.
The council's saying, oh, let's see what happens with that because something's going to happen with that. So let's just wait and see.
Yeah, okay. And council can install them. Right, are we? Do people still want a minute or two on this? Are you still feeling like you're producing new ideas? Cara, yes, it is being recorded. And there are some earlier questions where someone said, does this relate to the guide produced in London? The regen guide that I touched on, yes and no, in that it has tried not to repeat what the London guide did. And it will point to it where, particularly for the leases and templates that are in there. All right. And I can see a handful of emails have just come into me as well. Right. Okay. LGR. Finance. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. All right. That looks that's looking pretty comprehensive to me. Some of these are definitely ones that we have seen before. Right. So the next thing I was going to basically do was go to a Q&A generally at this point, whether people had some questions. So if I scroll down to the very bottom, there were a couple that I saw around, you know, is this recorded and when will the toolkit be available and things like that. If you've got new questions at this point, I think possibly the best thing is if you put your little yellow hand thing up and we will take them. So who do I have here? Chris Brown?
Yeah, I just wondered if you were going to cover residential council assets in the guide.
As in council housing?
Yeah.
So one of the case studies I was going to put in is Barnsley, Energise Barnsley, and there's another one in Staffordshire Moorlands who've done community-based solar on council housing. The important thing to remember about the guide is that it's not about site level decision making. So what the strategy commits a council to is going out and looking at what can be done, and then the barrier busting thing will try and preempt the questions that will get raised. So one of those questions will be, I think it might be yours in the chat there that says, what happens if a tenant wants to buy their house and it's got solar on it? All of those questions will have been addressed by people like Barnsley and the Staffordshire Moorlands project. So it'll be about pointing to the successful ways that those concerns have been dealt with. Yep.
Thank you. It's complicated. It's much more complicated on blocks of flats in London.
Right. Okay. Because
generally you have to export the electricity.
okay. And so the organisations like Brixton and Camden, all the ones that work under the Repowering London umbrella, they will have again dealt with those because most of their arrays are on tower blocks.
No, they've stopped doing residential. We've got a partnership with Repowering.
Oh, they stopped doing it because they can no longer export?
They were struggling to make it
make it financially
an economic model, yeah.
Right. Okay. It may be that tower blocks, it seems to me odd that tower blocks wouldn't be economically viable. I'll have a think about what we can. I mean, there's a limit. This is, there's a like we don't have the resource or the time to build complex financial models for tower blocks, because that's each one of them will be different anyway. We can just point to places where a question has been raised and is unsolvable. But again, in terms of adopting a strategy to say we're going to support this, again, it goes back to that kind of category error question I was saying earlier, like every council is different. Some big rural councils have got completely random collections of buildings, including farms and so on. Urban councils have a very different sort of estate. Some councils own housing and some councils don't. Some councils own their leisure centres, and for some of it, it's all sort of a bought-in service. So the idea is basically we look at our assets and we say, is it possible? We are attempting to make this possible, and it may be that for a certain London borough it's just simply not possible because the only assets you own are tower blocks and you cannot make it stack up financially. But at least with the strategy you would have looked at it, but presumably there are other things like offices and libraries and such like.
It's definitely possible. I know Toby's on this call, and I know Afshin would be interested from Repowering. So if you wanted a little brains trust, we could help.
Yeah, if you want to send me a brain dump in an email about why it's tricky at the minute, that could be helpful. Yeah.
Will do.
Okay, in the order that they've come up, Marion Kempson. Sorry, your name was cut off. Hi.
Yes, I'm Marion Kempson. I'm from the North Eastern Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. And we work with public estate on public estate decarbonisation, working with local authorities.
Yeah.
And I just want to sort of put the local authority perspective is that we are working with local authorities to identify which buildings that are suitable for solar. So I think it's important to make sure that you find the right person in the local authority, because they're not always people in the local authority who will put up barriers. There are people who are also looking for funding options now. So
yeah, definitely.
I think it's just really, and I think also that it's and your point about not picking up one building is important, because obviously the local authority know their buildings, and particularly if they've managed to carry out roof surveys or they know the conditions of the roof, so they will know which buildings, which schools, leisure centres, offices are suitable for roofs. So it's a comment.
And that's actually a really valid point, because the strategy document commits councils to doing an asset assessment. And again, that varies from, some councils have extraordinarily detailed asset assessments already. They may have recently done them when they applied for things like the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund. And then other councils are sort of like, we just don't know. We haven't looked, we are short staffed or whatever. So again, every community group is going to be dealing with a council at a different stage. And you might find that you go in and you're trying to get your council to sort of strategically support the idea of community solar, and they can then move forward in fairly short order because, as Marion said, they've already got an assessment. They've just gone around in circles about what now to do with it. So that's a useful point. Next one on my screen is Dean Hill.
Hello there, Rachel. Thanks ever so much for the pearls of wisdom so far. And the little glimpse at the anchor document. I've been on the periphery of a few of those in recent times. I'm going to try and stay positive, but I mean, from a baseline perspective, we've put in Big Solar Co-op, we've put in 20 projects now, all of which are commercial and community ones. We've done lots and lots and lots of engagement with councils, to the point where my colleagues are saying, why are you wasting your time? We're getting very, very close with some, but one in particular where we help them redesign their tender process to go generally across all community energy, and then a council of a particular political flavour got in and it just completely stopped.
Right.
So for me, the result of all that engagement makes it very clear there's 3 layers of prospects here. There's the council owned and operated, which is a property and a procurement situation. There's the council owned but operated independently, which I'll come back to in a second. And then there's businesses and organisations that just happen to be within the council area. Now, we're coming very, very close with a couple of councils of addressing that last list. And in fact, informally, lots of councils will be saying, why don't you try these guys over here? Why don't you try those guys over there? And we have actually installed some of those projects, but nothing formal yet. But my main interest lies in the middle ground, because the first one, where it's owned and operated by the council, where it involves procurement, I'll be brutally honest, in the commercial and community sector, we've got so many other things to be doing that it's going to take forever to get procurement to a place where it works for community energy at the rate it's going. But that middle ground, and herein lies my question, how do we get across to councils that if they own the building, it's a property transaction for the rooftop lease, but if it's independently operated, somebody else is paying the bill? And it isn't a procurement situation, it's a, what are the chances are, if it's reversionary, this PPA ever comes back to us, how likely is that to happen, and how long might it happen for, rather than a complete belt and braces procurement effort? Because I think if we can crack that nut, we can open up that whole middle tranche and actually make some progress with councils on their buildings.
Yeah, which is quite relevant to leisure centres very often, which are very often sub-managed in that way.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, which I've sort of considered. But I'm gonna make a note of that, thinking about the because it doesn't change the fact that these would be concession contracts, because what you would be doing as the community group is putting your array on what is the council's asset, because it owns it, therefore you're exploiting their asset. So that all of that stuff through procurement would still need to happen, but it does affect some of the risk conversations that people have around the liabilities that would accrue if the tenant
massively reduces the risk. And the procurement departments are just going, oh, Wooga, it's community energy, we don't understand it. And
that is the issue, because you made a very important point. We did all this stuff and then a councillor came in and it all went wrong. That, to my mind, is the crucial thing that we're trying to address, which is you cannot have individual personalities changing things on the flip of a dime. It has to be that this has gone through a democratic decision-making process and been adopted as a strategy, because the fundamental thing is that community energy, once it's up and running and is successful, is extremely palatable across the board politically, but partly because of the way the sector presents itself, it can come across as unappealing at the beginning. So if we can get over that hump with certain types, then we end up with something that feels like it's about local resilience, it's about local economic strength and so on. It's about local people having local benefit, all of those things. And we talk less about climate and social justice and all of those things. Once we get there and we get it adopted, which is the register that all of these documents are written in. I actually don't think I've mentioned climate change once in any of the documents, really.
All the way.
So anyway, all right, let's move on. Thank you. That's
Rachel,
really useful.
Sorry, Rach, just to say we've got about just over 5. We can run on a little bit,
but a couple of minutes left.
We're coming up to the end.
I'm going to take. I've got Cara, and then I've got Stuart, and then I've got Mark, who've all got questions. I'm going to take Cara's first. Stuart and Mark, while Cara's speaking, could you type your questions into the chat or the Q&A, just in case I don't get to them, because then at least I can think about them afterwards. Cara, can you make yours punchy? Is it a long, complicated question?
Thanks for this. Can't wait to get it. Really helpful. Additional issues we've had: community energy wanting to do a ground mounted solar, supposed to have support from the council, went to planning, got thrown out. Is there help in the document about that?
No, we cannot provide detailed guidance on how to get planning for solar. And again, it's down to, that's a category error issue. When we start at the project level, then when that project fails, everything is lost. Whereas if we're starting at the strategic level, that this council is committed to supporting community solar on our assets, then we come forward and the work is committed, that we are saying we're going to look at our assets and which ones are appropriate. At that point, we probably would have had conversations with planning inside the council and said, actually, that looks like it might be a little bit dodgy. But no, this resource can't do planning advice.
Sure. So that's a second section of what we need to do internally to support that. And just about PPAs, is that also within the guidance? How
PPAs, we're going to be pointing principally to the Regen London guide, which has quite some useful templates and some anonymised legal advice that's already been provided, presumably to a given council who didn't want to have their name on it in the end, or couldn't for whatever reason. Stuart, can we squeeze Stuart's question in?
Hi, thanks. Very interesting so far. I've got 4 council properties. 3 are getting solar PV with batteries through S106 agreements. The 4th, the largest one, is where I want to put something like a 50 kilowatt facility on with battery storage. But our biggest consumer is the council building itself. What is the best way to link those 4 up so we can use our self-generated power internally rather than just relying on PPAs with their variable sort of returns?
When you say I have got, sorry, do you represent the council or are you a community group?
Both.
Okay. What you're asking is completely outside of the scope of this guidance. This is what you're basically saying is how can we sleeve our own supply from other buildings to the council's building? Is that you're saying you've got arrays on 4 buildings, the offices are elsewhere, and you want to self-supply through a sleeved arrangement?
Yes.
That's basically what you want to do. But I couldn't advise you on it, and it won't be part of this guidance as to how to do that. I imagine someone in APSI, if you go to APSI, might be able to provide you with some. It's an energy purchasing question. And it's exactly the same as you know, if you built a wind turbine somewhere and you wanted to have a sleeved supply directly to a building that isn't private wire, but is somehow effectively trading from that building. Let's see if we can squeeze the very last question in, which is Mark.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi. So I did put my questions in, but can't see them, so I don't know if they went through.
Oh,
no,
okay.
the issue, I'm a councillor and represent community energy. Our issue is that where the council is a freeholder and they have a building and the tenant is completely hostile to having any solar PV on the roof, the council is extremely unwilling or unable to assert its freeholder's right over the tenant, because actually they're more frightened of the freeholder, they're more frightened of the tenant than they are of community energy. So that's one frustration. The other thing, in our community energy scheme, we're not looking to sell the energy to the council. We're looking to sell it to ourselves and rent the roof space from them. And I just asked if that made a difference to any of this. Thank you. So I'm going to whistle stop.
Yeah, so on the former, there are some things that just can't be overcome. You know, if someone is trading off whether to go with community energy or really annoy a tenant that they value the income from, then at some point that becomes a political decision that it's a project level failure. You know, that site is not progressible, not for technical reasons, but because of the tenant. Those are not decisions that this toolkit can aim for. In terms of your second question, a lot of the case for community energy is based on the fact that the council leases the asset at a peppercorn rent and then receives reduced rate electricity as a result. So you would be making quite a different case, and I think it sits outside of what this guidance will be able to help you with. Given that we're at the last minute of this meeting, I probably can't advise, but it doesn't sound to me like it fits the model that is usually adopted.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Everyone else, thank you very much for hanging on for the last couple of minutes. Kirsty, do you have a final word?
I was just going to say that the only other question I think that wasn't answered, apart from the things that people raised as barriers, so the launch online event will be the 23rd of June, and we will send out more information. As you've registered for this, then you'll be on the mailing list for that. So hopefully 23rd of June is what we're aiming for, and Rachel will still have all her hair at the end of that process, hopefully. But yeah, I would just wanted to say thank you so much, Rachel, for your hard work. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this meeting and for your input. Really helpful, great consultation. And if you've been to the other events as well, thank you very much for all the consultation along the way as well. And Rachel, do you want to just sign off?
Yeah, Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll look at what's in the Q&A. There's a limit to how much we can include, but the idea is to address the main questions that seem to come up over and over again, sometimes by reference to where it's already been solved, and sometimes by we'll do a bit of digging and see how it could be solved. We can't guarantee that it will be able to cover absolutely everything, and what we certainly can't do is site by site level stuff. But the one thing I want to take away from you is the whole point of this is get strategic, political and senior commitment to supporting community energy on council sites. Don't try and get an agreement through a junior officer for this building, because when that falls apart, you've wasted a lot of time, you know, on one project where you could have been looking at a whole kind of asset-based strategy. All right, we will be back in touch at some point soon.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.